Now to start our lab on respiratory tissues, we're looking at olfactory epithelium first. And this is kind of berry purple, raspberry color. Right here I have 3 cells with these nuclei. They widen out here, then get narrower, and then spread out down here. These are your olfactory cells. At their base penetrates that basement membrane. I have a line across there for basement membrane. As it extends up here, it forms axon fibers. They go on up toward the brain, the olfactory lobe of the brain up there. So I've drawn 3 olfactory cells. When you're trying to recognize them in olfactory tissue, their nucleus will lie above or past the row of basal cells we have in brown here. This series across here are basal cells. Next nuclei out would be olfactory cells. And then the third cell type of the olfactory epithelium is the supporting cell or sustentacular cell in red here. And their nuclei generally lie closer to the surface, out beyond the nuclei of the olfactory cells. So we have basal cells. We have the supporting or sustentacular cells. And olfactory cells make up this layer primarily. There are some brush cells and some other cell types in that zone that are not as abundant and not easily seen in our light microscope preparations. There's also the extension of Bowman's gland, and over here we have Bowman's gland. And the Bowman's gland secretes a watery secretion that will coat the surface of our olfactory epithelium. This tiny little duct leads down from the gland that's up here in the lamina propria zone. So here we have the duct of the gland. As I mentioned, above this line right here, that would be the basement membrane, and up in here we would have a lamina propria. Consists of loose connective tissue, a very loose connective tissue for the most part, beyond that basement membrane. That very loose connective tissue includes the Bowman's glands and the aggregations of axon fibers coming from the olfactory epithelium. Now these axon fibers gather together to make up unmyelinated nerve groups. So this would be an unmyelinated nerve, the unmyelinated nerve. Now beyond the lamina propria, that zone where we have the glands and the loose connective tissue, above that, we're going to have some bone or cartilage to the outside of that, and between the bone and cartilage in the lamina propria, there's either going to be what we call a periosteum, or if it's next to cartilage, it's called a perichondrium. Periosteum next to bone, perichondrium next to cartilage. It's simply a dense connective tissue layer that lies up against that supporting tissue that supports the olfactory epithelium and lamina propria there. So those are the things we're going to look for in our olfactory epithelium slide. We'll look for olfactory cells, sustentacular cells, basal cells. We'll look at the lamina propria, we'll look at Bowman's glands, we'll look for a duct. We'll see some places will have bone, some places will have cartilage. We'll see periosteum and perichondrium, and we'll see an unmyelinated nerve bundle in there. There are places in your nasal passages where you transition from one cell type to another, and we're going to see how as you go into the nose, the stratified squamous epithelium that lines the entrance to your nasal passages transforms, changes over to a stratified columnar epithelium like what we see here. So our first view of olfactory epithelium, we see this pseudostratified columnar epithelium lining this surface here and this surface over here. This is part of a nasal concha, a scroll-shaped bone layer that is found coming in from the wall of your nasal passages. This bit here and all this right here, this is bone tissue, very narrow, very small bits of bone. This is probably not human, it's probably like a rat or some other animal like that. So anyway, this would be the center of a nasal concha. To either side of that bony tissue here, you're going to find lamina propria tissue and then the epithelium. This tissue adjacent to the bone would be periosteal tissue. There's a artery right here and either a lymph or venule right here. These are Bowman's glands. More venules, they have blood in them, so I know they're not lymphatic vessels. So there could be lymphatic vessels, veins, venules, arteries, arterioles, all that in that as well, of course. In our next picture, we're going to see some hyaline cartilage. There's a good span of hyaline cartilage that you're familiar with, right across the middle. The dense connective tissues that lie right adjacent to that, right on the top, those are going to be perichondrial tissues. It's dense connective tissue of the cartilage, the perichondrium. And then beyond that, we have loose connective tissues. This example shows where we have the transition between the stratified squamous epithelium here, and it changes over in this span right through here from being a stratified squamous to being a pseudostratified columnar epithelium. These are Bowman's glands here. All these are Bowman's glands. In this view, we've got a close-up of that pseudostratified columnar epithelium. This is lamina propria. Up here, we've got some vessels, either lymph or blood vessels up here. Our basement membrane would stretch right across here, and these cells just inside of that would be our basal cells. These dark nuclei we see right here. Number of basal cell nuclei in there. Now, the cells that extend out beyond that, like this one, these are olfactory cells. And notice the very long, narrow extension from the nucleus to the surface. The narrow extension. Here, this one has one also. So anyway, those are olfactory cells. Those in between right here, these are these sustentacular cells. Good view of an olfactory cell body right there and right here. Those are your best examples in that particular view. Some other examples. Right here in the middle of the screen, there's the nucleus of this olfactory cell coming out to the front, or to the top. And any of these narrow cells you see through here are likely olfactory cells. Those that are broad throughout, like this one right here, those would be your sustentacular cells. And again, we have basal cells right up in here. The lamina propria is all very loose connective tissue. You see quite a few cilia out here on the surface. Another view. Oh, there's a couple of olfactory cells here. A good sustentacular or supporting cells set right here. Basal cell nuclei right along through here. loose connective tissue in the lamina propria and lots of blood cells up there, so that must be a venule in the wall of the mucosal membrane. This slide was meant to show sustentacular cells, so we have a number of sustentacular cells with a broader cytoplasm that reaches to the surface of the epithelium. Over here we have an olfactory cell here. There's probably one right there and right there. It's a little crowded in. And then our next one, these are of course good examples of sustentacular cells all in a row here. Demonstrating Bowman's glands, good examples of Bowman's glands all through here. Good dark staining cells make up that group, and they form a nice glandular shape. All this is loose connective tissue. There's a venule here. Looks like periosteum right here. There's a little bit of stuff before you get to a bone tissue down below. Another example of Bowman's gland right here. I was hoping that would be connected to a duct where we could see all of the simple cuboidal cells that border the duct leading in there. We can just see a few of them right there. The rest of that's olfactory epithelium with some olfactory cells, the narrow ones, and then the sustentacular cells. You can see both of those cell types, and you see a number of basal cells in there as well. Here we see a non-myelinated nerve fiber right here, a cluster of nerve fibers coming through. Oh, that's what it looks like. It's kind of an odd appearing tissue in the lamina propria there, and elongated nuclei and kind of a streaky, stringy look to that. But it's definitely different than everything that surrounds it. Oh, this is loose connective tissue with vessels of different kinds. Bowman's glands here, and there's your olfactory epithelial layer up there. More bone down here, periosteal connective tissue here, and then the lamina propria layer here with Bowman's glands scattered through. Wherever we took this picture, we didn't have olfactory epithelium. We have stratified squamous epithelium. Then we have connective tissues associated with the epithelium, so that would be a lamina propria zone. Not as loose looking as what we saw in the other locations. And then we have the connective tissues associated with the cartilage. So this would be perichondrial connective tissues outside of the cartilage.